Hello there, students. Thank you for being part of this presentation today. My name is Luis Silva, and today we're focusing on world history, Martin Luther, and the Protestant Reformation, and we're covering the years from 1517 all the way to 1555. Let's move on. What was the Protestant Reformation? The Protestant Reformation was the 16th century religious, political, intellectual, and cultural movement that divided Catholic Europe, setting in place the structure and belief that would define the continent in the modern era. Reformers like Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Henry VIII challenged papal authority and questioned the Catholic Church's ability to define Christian practices. They argued for a religious and political redistribution of power into the hands of the Bible. The key ideas of the Reformation included a call to purify the church and a belief that the Bible, not tradition, should be the sole source of spiritual authority. Luther and other reformers became the first to skillfully use the power of the printing press to give their ideas a wide audience. Very important. Let's move on. During the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church was the dominant religion in Western Europe. Without a common government in Europe, the Catholic Pope became an important political leader that dictated what people could do and what they could not do. On the manner, priests were powerful because they controlled people's access to heaven by delivering the sacraments and absolving sins according to them. The Catholic Church taught that people could gain access to heaven, which is called salvation, by having faith in God and doing good works for others. What were some of the practices of the Catholic Church? Well, the Church thought that Christians could gain more of God's grace through a series of spiritual rituals called the Holy Sacraments. And these sacraments include baptism, confirmation, communion, confession, marriage, ordination of priests, and last rites for the dying. But the church was also growing very corrupt. Clergy members took vows to abstain from sex, but some church leaders fathered children. Priests were required to go through rigorous training in the monastery, but some church positions were sold to the highest bidders called simony. Sometimes feudal lords would use their influence to have friends or children named as priests called lay investiture. As a result of all of these practices, some clergy members were poorly educated. One of the most corrupt church practices was a practice known as the selling of indulgences. Indulgences began as a way for people to repent for their sins through good works. But rather than requiring good deeds, church leaders began selling indulgences and as a way of raising money. These practices, for the most part, went unquestioned during the Middle Ages. By the time of the Renaissance, some Christians began to criticize this practice. Some of them began to say and talk against corruption, and they also questioned the Catholic teachings. In the 1300s, reformers like John Wycliffe and priest Wycliffe Hus attacked corruption like indulgences. They said that the Bible, not the Pope, was the ultimate authority on Christianity and wanted church teachings in the vernacular, or also known as local language and not Latin. Catholic leaders responded to this criticism by executing Wycliffe and Hus. Very important for you to know that at this time you could not criticize the Catholic Church, because if you criticize the Catholic Church, you were going to get killed. You were going to be part of those rebels, or as the Catholic Church called them, rebels, and you were going to pay with your life. In 1509, Christian humanist Erasmus published Praise of Folly, which called for an end to corruption. By the way, the Catholic Church did not take this very well. As a result of Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the movable type printing press in 1453, Erasmus' book spread throughout Europe and increased call for church reform. And here you have an image of how the printing press worked and how it helped to bring changes into the lives of people, because now people could actually read and get informed. Information is very important in modern day society, and it was very important in the society around this time period. The printing press was very important because prior to the printing press, it took a writer 5 months to write one book. With the printing press, in 5 months, 500 books were actually produced and distributed for people to read. So the printing press was instrumental in making sure that the ideas of the reformers, in this case, the ideas of the scientific revolution, were able to spread quickly throughout Europe. Let's move on. The Protestant Reformation. By the early 1500s, the Catholic Church was in turmoil over the controversy of corruption and its unwillingness to adopt reforms. In Germany, a Catholic monk named Martin Luther became involved in a serious dispute with the Catholic Church. Martin Luther's break from the Catholic Church began the Protestant Reformation, and it inspired a series of new Christian denominations. For example, you see how the early Christian church was broken down into two separate groups, the Eastern Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholic Church. This took place in 1054. And then in the 16th century, we have the Reformation, which we know as the Protestant Reformation, which led to Lutheranism, Anglicanism, and Calvinism. And within those different groups, you have other subgroups that evolved. During the Protestant Reformation, reformers protested church corruption and practices in hopes of reforming Christianity. And up to a certain degree, they were able to do so. Now, let's talk a little bit about Martin Luther. As a young boy in Germany, Luther was going to become a lawyer. But after he nearly died in a thunderstorm, he vowed to become a Catholic priest. After studying the Bible as a monk, Luther became a priest and a scholar. During his studies of the Bible, Luther became convinced that salvation could not be achieved by good works and sacraments. Instead, Luther was inspired by St. Paul's epistle to the Romans, which said a person can be made good by having faith in God's mercy. Martin Luther believed that salvation was gained through having faith in God. He called this idea justification by faith. By the way, this is a big topic today in modern day Protestant churches. Martin Luther was also deeply troubled by the church selling of indulgences, which he saw as a false salvation. So he reacted against the sale of indulgences, and in 1517, Martin Luther wrote a list of arguments against the church practices, and these arguments are known as the 95 Theses. He posted the 95 Theses on the church door in the town of Wittenberg and welcomed debate of his ideas. Remember, we have the printing press, which helped to spread all of Luther's ideas to many places in Europe. The 95 Theses spread quickly throughout Europe, causing an incredible controversy. Many people, especially in Northern Europe, were excited about his ideas, but the Catholic Church condemned Luther and rejected his ideas. In 1521, Luther was called before the Diet of Worms, a meeting of church and political leaders. The church demanded that Luther take back his teachings. Luther, on the other hand, refused to do so and argued that the Bible was the only source of religious authority and encouraged Christians to study the Bible for themselves. At the Diet of Worms, Martin Luther was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. He was kicked out, basically, of the Catholic Church. And Martin Luther's stand against the Catholic Church led to the formation of a new Christian denomination known as Lutheranism. This is what we saw before here, the same basically image which shows how the early Christian church was divided into many groups within different time periods. Lutheranism was the first of a series of Protestant Christian faiths that broke from the Catholic Church. And right here we obviously have the different ideas, religious belief and practices in the 16th century. You have Roman Catholicism, we have Lutheranism, we have Calvinism, we have Anglicanism, and you see how they believed the different doctrines basically that they adopted here about the Bible, about salvation, about worship service, about interpretations and beliefs of the Bible. You're more than welcome to pause the video so you can see this more carefully. And here we have a map of Europe, and this is roughly in the year 1560, and it's color coded with different colors. You have green, you have purple, you have orange, you have yellow, and all of these colors represent the different denominations that were already in place in 1560 throughout Europe. Remember that prior to this, the Catholic Church dominated all of these areas. We have now come to the end of this presentation. Please do not forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next presentation.